And have you used AI to create any of that messaging, or is that something you're doing sort of while collaborating with the various members of these teams? How have you decided upon what that consistent template or email or message should be?
I think one thing that we often miss is that AI knows a lot. It doesn't know everything, but it knows a lot. And one thing it does know are demographics. And so one thing I've really loved about AI is I've been able to say, these are my 3 sales channels that I directly support. B2B, B2C, and retail. How do I make this consistent across the board? And how do I make it relevant across the board? And it will give me back what I'm looking for. Then what's really important is to go back and challenge it.
One of the things that we've had a lot of fun with the AI is it's been pretty effective at creating messaging or talk tracks consistent with a particular sales methodology. And then when you prompt it to do a different one, it's pretty accurate. It's getting better all the time, but I find that when prompted properly, it'll deliver the right type of nuance.
Right now, we're focusing on becoming more of a consultative sales process. Not just, a customer will call in all the time to say like, hey, this is what I need. Our challenge is to take that from all right, like let's be transactional, let's get them what they need, to why do you need that? What benefit does this have? Other customers that I've had that have had the same problem, have looked for the same product, they've wondered about these things. Is that true with you? How can we match what we have to what you need? And so that's been, do we follow a specific model? No, but we are trying to move from being transactional, this is company-wide, from being transactional to being more consultative.
Hi, welcome to the Sales Elevation Podcast. My name is Ed Kerr, and I have my guest, Stephen Melson, here today. Stephen is the Sales Enablement Manager with Lamps Plus. Stephen is our first guest who's really comes from the L&D world. I'm so excited to have him. Stephen, thanks for showing up, man.
Thanks for having me on. I'm excited.
Yeah. Well, we've had some great conversations in advance of this, and so I'm so glad to have someone from the L&D perspective to share your experiences. And I know that when you joined Lamps Plus, you have about 340 people for which you're providing, sort of learning and development services and support. And you've put a lot of systems in place. And so excited to learn from you and have some of our listeners learn from you as well. So let's start with maybe just a little bit of background on some of the things that you've experienced as you've kind of begun building out this program. I know that you mentioned some of the things that you were focused on initially were needs to get really your team properly supported so that they could perform at their best. And you mentioned role playing as being something that was an initial focus. But I thought you said something interesting, which was that you thought the most important skill or quality of a salesperson is curiosity. And that certainly kind of reflects itself in good role playing. And for those who don't role play well, it's usually a lot of telling and not much asking. So give me your thoughts on role playing and what you've done at Lamps Plus to sort of implement that in your organization.
Yeah, I think that's a great tool to have in your quiver. I think a lot of people are nervous about role play because they don't want to be an actor. They don't want to be in front of somebody else and going through a made up situation. What I have found has been really helpful is to start by saying, all right, so it's not a made up situation. Bring me a problem that you actually have. Let me see what you're actually going through. Use real objections, use real problems that they're having, and be that customer. And let me demonstrate what it would look like. And I think one misconception people have about sales is you have to know everything. And I think the real key is to be curious about everything. I think you have to say, tell me about that. Why is that a problem for you and for your company? Why, as from a coaching perspective, why is it that you get tripped up on that? Is it because you're not used to saying the words, or is it that you don't feel confident in what you're talking about? Tell me about that. So I think taking that curiosity, not trying to expose the person as being a fraud, but trying to say like, all right, tell me what it is that you wish you would have known on that call. And then taking that as a learning experience to say like, all right, so you feel like you're not confident in talking to a general contractor because you've never been on a construction site before. Like, why is that a problem for you? And diving into that, almost like being a therapist, therapist manager, so you can find out what that is. And then once they have experienced it through role play, now they're in a different spot where they can say, yeah, I've done this before, and I've gotten the marbles out of the mouth. And I think that's just as important for managers as it is for salespeople itself. A lot of managers say, yeah, I can do that. But until they have role played that with you, and until they've said, okay, I thought that question was going to work, it doesn't work. They don't know that. You can tell them it
Hmm.
doesn't work, but there's no buy-in on that until someone says, wow, I thought this was a good question, but it's not. And that
Right.
helps them get to a better place with their coaching and role playing.
Yeah. And I love that it requires curiosity on both sides, right? Curiosity from the manager to really understand the current state of that sales rep. They might be hiding the fact that they don't like this particular issue, or they're nervous about making that call. So you're trying to of course encourage them to be curious about the prospect, but at the same time you've got to really be curious about their needs. And so I love that curiosity all the way around. You mentioned that one of the big things that you've done is worked very closely with managers to collaborate with them, and that it's about really kind of helping you understand what goals they're setting for their teams and how they're coaching those reps to meet those goals, how they're managing their time. What have been some of the things you've done with managers to collaborate more successfully with them as an L&D pro?
Yeah, I think carrying on that curiosity of going into a coaching situation with a manager and saying, tell me about your team, tell me about the challenges that you have on your team, and what have you done in the past? How has that worked out for you? I think those are questions that really start the coaching conversation in the right way. If you can go to all of these different managers and ask the same question and get vastly different responses because people
Mhm.
are coming at it from a different perspective. But then when you ask them, how are you coaching your reps to hit their goals? I had an experience where I went into a manager and said, tell me about how you set goals. And they said, well, I don't. I just tell them what their goals are. And then we meet the next month
Mhm.
or quarter or whatever it is and say, yeah, you didn't get to those goals. It's like, yeah, don't be surprised that didn't help because you didn't find out about their challenges. They didn't have buy-in on that. And I loved seeing the light turn on in that manager's eyes when they realized that they can set goals with their people. They can ask them, okay, that's a really great goal that you just set. That goal that you set is $20,000 more than you're normally closing. How are you going to get there? Is that a realistic goal? What's the path? And then being able to pull people back maybe, or even push people forward and just say, you know what, your goal is fine. I bet you can do better. I have seen the skills that you have. You can do better. Let's work together on how to do it. And I think that's important. I almost slipped up there and saying, let me show you how to do it. And let's work together on getting there and making a plan to make it happen. You can't just say, yeah, I'm going to reach those goals or I'm going to hit those calls or whatever and not actually have a plan on how you're going to make that number in the future.
I read a great article not so long ago that featured Tom Brady, and he talked about the importance of and difference between leading and lagging indicators. And a lot of
Mm.
sales leaders simply focus on the lagging indicators. Hey, here's our quota for this month as a team or as individuals. Let's go get it, charge the hill. But they're not focusing on the leading indicators, which might be that salesperson's activities or their skill sets, their weaknesses, their strengths, their motivations. So that how are we going to hit that seems to be lost with some sales leaders. And I think
Yeah,
they're really
absolutely.
missing the mark, and they find out they missed the mark when that lagging indicator shows up and it's low, right? So I love
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
And when you're working with some of the managers, what we hear often is that so many of us in general, but managers in particular, are overburdened. The ratio of manager to rep is only increased over time, and they don't really have the time to provide that one-on-one coaching. They're, maybe focusing on a small percentage of their team and maybe just the top people. And so a lot of the people that are underperformers who have a lot of room for growth just aren't getting the kind of attention they need. So, and I know you mentioned that you've been using some AI tools. Give me an example of how you've supported the managers with your leveraging some AI tools recently.
Yeah, absolutely. So we had a request come in from a partner on for product tech training, just how do you troubleshoot the products that we're selling. And what I was able to do was I was able to use Zoom AI Companion. So it just came with it with the tools that we have. I was able to use that tool to analyze an entire chat room and cut down everything that we were having in that chat room that would have taken me days and it wouldn't have been accurate if I would have done it by my own human skill. And we're able
And
to get all of the information down into a couple paragraphs. I then took that information to the partners and I said, this is what AI is telling me is what you're dealing with. Is that right? And they were able to say, yes, actually that matches exactly what we would have said. So we then took that information, put it into a survey and sent it out to the people. All right, so this is what we think you're having difficulties with, or what would be the most helpful if you knew more about. Is that right? And the data came back and it totally matched what AI had said. So I think being
Mhm.
able to use that tool in a way that saves time and then also improves or enhances the information that we already have is the best way to use AI, because you get so much more out of it than if you were to hire a whole team of people just to analyze the data. You really have to be willing to work with the tools to make it work for you.
That's awesome. That's great. Yeah. And it really is this phenomenal force multiplier. And you can identify a very specific need and leverage it. It's everybody wins. So tell me about some other issues. You'd mentioned that one of the challenges, since you've got various channels or groups that you're working with, that maintaining consistency across those groups is difficult. And you identified that your strategy first was to understand where is there commonality amongst those groups and how could you create some consistency where commonality exists, and then focus on some of the areas individually where there were differences. So can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I had a partner come to me and say, this person was over the email team and saying, we need some templates, or we need some better ways to communicate through email. In itself, that is a great option. That's something that team needed and could benefit from. But I was thinking about it. We all use email in our business. So how can we zoom out and make it so that we are getting more bang for our buck for that? And so we
Mhm.
went into a whole training content of how do we write better emails. Is this got created? I found some third-party vendors that were able to create this training they already had it created for us, and I was able to use that in our LMS and get that distributed out to our teams and saying, all right, here are the key principles for creating better emails. Did the same thing with empathy. We recently had an empathy and professional communication training that went out to the entire org. That is something, is that we all needed. Is empathy only worthwhile for a salesperson? No, you can use that in service. You can use that at a director's level. You can use that wherever you are. That is something that is applicable to you. And so being able to use those experiences to say, is that just one person, or is that an entire team that's having this problem? And if it's the entire team, is this other teams as well? Is your team unique in this need, or are there more people? And so I think in that way, we're able to build consistent training across the board that helps everybody. And then we can drill down. Then we can say, all right, so you're a B2B person. Your email is going to sound a little different than a B2C person. And being able to
Mhm.
help refine that, but you got to start with the top of the funnel and then move
Yep.
down from there into something that makes more sense for the individual.
And have you used AI to create any of that messaging, or is that something you're doing sort of while collaborating with various members of these teams? How have you decided upon what that consistent template or email or message should be?
Yeah. I think one thing that we often miss is that AI knows a lot. It doesn't know everything, but it knows a lot. And one thing it does know are demographics. And so if we can say, hey, I am an e-commerce or whatever your industry is, manager, trainer, whatever it is, I'm looking to create some content that is applicable to these people. Here are the problems that we are having. What are some helpful prompts or training topics that would be applicable to everyone? And so one thing I've really loved about AI is I've been able to say, these are my 3 sales channels that I directly support. B2B, B2C, and retail. How do I make this consistent across the board? And how do I make it relevant across the board? And it will give me back what I'm looking for. Then what's really important is to go back and challenge it. You said this topic, but I don't think that's really relevant because of these things. Try again. One thing I love about AI is that it never gets offended. And so if you say like, okay, that was great, make it a million times better. It'll say, yes, let's make it a million times better. And it will do that. What makes it even better is if you can say, make it better by doing this. And it
Mhm.
will come back to you and say, all right, I've taken your feedback that you've given me, and now I am providing something a lot more relevant. It's that step-by-step process that makes AI a tool instead of just a stumbling block. A lot of people put in garbage and they complain when they get garbage out of AI. Well, you've got to give it something to work off of. If you say like, make me a picture, it's going to make you a picture. But if you say, make me this specific picture, it's going to give you. And the same thing goes with sales training, with L&D, with sales enablement. If you just say, give me some scripts or give me some email templates, it'll give you some, but they won't be very good. But if you say, this is my context. This is what I want you to do with the context. And this is the voice that we're looking for. You can put in your company voice, put in your customer profile in there, and it will come back to you and say, this is what I deem appropriate for what you're looking for. And then it's back on you again to say, all right, you missed it or you got it right on. And then you run from there.
Yeah. And does your company follow any particular sales methodology like Challenger or Sandler or Medic or any formats like that?
Yeah,
Is
all the above.
all of them? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right now we're focusing on becoming more of a consultative sales process. Not just, a customer will call in all the time to say like, hey, this is what I need. Our challenge is to take that from all right, like, let's be transactional, let's get them what they need, to why do you need that? What benefit does this have? Other customers that I've had that have had this same problem have looked for the same product. They've wondered about these things. Is that true with you? How can we match what we have to what you need? And so do we follow a specific model? No, but we are trying to move from being a transactional, and this is company wide, from being transactional to being more consultative.
That's great. Yeah. One of the things that we've had a lot of fun with is with the AI is it's been pretty effective at creating messaging or talk tracks consistent with a particular sales methodology. And then when you prompt it to do a different one, it's pretty accurate. It's
Hmm.
getting better all the time, but I find that when prompted properly, it'll deliver the right type of nuance. And so it's been great, I'm sure, in the L&D realm for that. Tell me about ROI as it relates to an L&D professional, because I'm hearing from a lot of them that there's a little bit of concern that with all of this AI automation that L&D professionals are really going to be challenged to really show their worth, and no better way to do that than to show that their efforts have impacted revenue. And so what are some ways in which you've been preparing in that regard and really kind of tying what you do to actual performance in terms of quarterly revenue?
Yeah, I think the first thing is that human element. I try to stick in really good relationship with all of the different directors of the different organizations within my org. I want to make best friends with those people so that I can understand what it is what are their challenges. You say you want improved sales, but why is your team struggling with those sales? What have you tried before? What have you thought about trying? What keeps them from being the best salespeople that they can? Then I take a look at the metrics that they're looking at. I think one of the things is L&D or sales enablement people, we look at those metrics and we're just saying, okay, let's get the sales up. But then there's that doubt that creeps in because I'm not personally selling it. So I can't make any of the sales for the people. So how do I do that? And I think the temptation for a lot of L&D people is to disassociate with the numbers and say, you know what, both for the positive and for the negative. For the positive, they don't take credit for the sales going up, but they also don't take credit for the sales going down, and asking themselves
Right.
what influenced that. What is it that changed? I was recently working with a B2C sales team, and I was thinking some of those same thoughts, right? I'm not even sitting with the agents themselves. How am I doing anything? But I was able to work with the manager, and we were able to improve the AOV by like 50% in 6 months.
Mm.
And so we were able to lift that up. And I was saying, all right, so what is it that happened? Well, the manager started doing X, Y, and Z. They started having more activity with their individuals. It was no longer a thing of how do I directly influence that number, but how do I influence the people that influence number? And then also, I think one thing that is, one thing that a lot of L&D people or sales enablement people do is we like to be in the background. We're not in the forefront. I think that's what makes us terrible salespeople is, salespeople, like they're really there's a lot of really good ones that say like, look at what I did, look how amazing I am, and nobody's better than me. And the sales and enablement people are in the background, and we're filling in where we can with what we do. But I think we need to step up and not be afraid of that light of saying, yes, the reason why your AOV went up by that percentage was because of the coaching that we did. It is not so much because we're trying to boast or trying to say like, hey, like, look at me, I'm the one who did that. But being able to tie the impact that we are doing to results means that other adopters will be there. Other people will start saying, well, I want that result for my team too. I had a manager that was saying, I asked him like, what's your goal? And he said, I want to be the GOAT. I want to be the GOAT. And so like, okay, going back to our, what's your plan for being the GOAT? And once he started having success, we were able to take that story and show that to other managers. This is what this manager was able to do. It works for you too. Can you make it work for you? Maybe we adopt it, maybe we change it. But what is it that motivates you to become better? So I think as far as metrics, looking at metrics is great. Knowing which metrics you can influence, and then also not being afraid to make those changes more visible to the org, getting out a newsletter to, these are some of the things that we have done in training or sales enablement to help you. I think it's not a selfish thing. It's a thing where you're saying, and it could work for you. If you're looking for something, it's a call to action, if this could be a benefit to you, here's my email, here's my phone number, give me a call. Let's make it work.
That's great. Yeah, I'm kind of hearing out of that a couple things. One, the challenge of attribution, right? Who gets the credit or the blame for sales going well or not? And too often, or most often, it's that frontline rep, their direct report, their manager, and sales enablement is just sort of back there somewhere, but has a huge amount of influence. And I think that since it is indirect, whether it's just the nature of things or whether it's a really a wonderful kind of position to be in, because you can have that curiosity and you can really kind of be at 30,000 feet and see, not just looking at the metrics, but genuinely curious about the struggles that manager's having or the struggles that frontline rep is having, and being able to have a real perspective on that and get to the root causes of it, and then develop solutions that address that root cause. Because sometimes we're all in the thick of it. We can't see the forest for the trees, but maybe that's where attribution could start with a report on the analysis and the assessment and the conclusions you came up with while investigating why numbers weren't hit, right? And then showing what you did. That might be the best way to get the attribution, is to start with where it started, you know? But well, tell me about your onboarding process and where you've had challenges and where you've provided solutions and what you've really seen work well when bringing somebody from a cold start to, you know, being capable of producing in front of a customer.
Yeah, I think one thing that I've taken on is a special spot in my heart for onboarding. I've been at several organizations where onboarding was done really well, and I've also seen it done very poorly. And I think being able to take those experiences and being able to add that in, putting yourself in the place of someone being onboarded and say, what would I need in this moment? I've learned that one thing that new people want is, what should I be able to do? And when, they feel so behind. If we are using a fire hose to shoot information at them, here's all of the history of our company, and here are the systems, and here are the whatevers, and here are the this and that and the other thing, and that's just too much. So I think being able to slow things down and be able to say, hey, you are 5 days into your training. You should not be able to do everything as an employee. You should not be able to do X, Y, and Z. However, you should be able to do this. I had one new hire that came to me and was saying, I feel like I'm failing. I think I should quit because I'm just not catching on to everything that's here. And I was able to take that checklist and say, all right, can you do A? Yes, I can do A. Can you do B and C and D? Yes, I can do all of those things. Then you're exactly where you should be. Like you are exactly where you should be. You're doing what you need to do. I've also implemented having a mentor having someone who actually has it'd be great to have a manager touch point with every new hire. That makes the sense because they're the person that's going to be managing that person. But sometimes you have to have someone who doesn't have the power to fire you to feel comfortable of saying like, hey, I don't know how to do this. And that's one thing I love about my job is that I can ask those questions. What do you think is broken? And this goes well beyond onboarding. This is someone who's been at the company for 16 years, 20 years, whatever it is. What do you think is broken? And what would you like to see changed about that thing? I think new hires are really great at providing that information of being able to say, at my old company, we did this and it was really helpful. Great. Let's take that idea and build on and make it work. Maybe it doesn't work, but maybe there are ideas or parts of that idea that we can use for the benefit of future onboarding. One thing I've learned to not be afraid of is the survey. I used to hate to send out the survey because I didn't want the negative feedback coming back. I was saying like, yeah, this training was terrible. But now I have a different perspective of that survey. Now, when someone comes back and they're saying, hey, I don't understand the content, I needed more examples. Great. Now I know to add in more examples or different examples in the future. I can also look at that and say, here's a one-off. This person said this thing. No one else has mentioned it. Maybe I think about that, but I don't have to necessarily put in everything that someone gives me feedback into the next training. So I think being able to use those surveys in understanding, how were they feeling? What do they know? I think having a pre-test and a post-test is another great thing for onboarding. I'd love to get to a point where we're onboarding someone, then we say, all right, here's this topic. What do you know about the topic? And then be able to say, all right, you have it. You can skip this part and you can move on to the next piece of the training. We have a really great tool within our LMS that provides AI feedback. And so I can train that bot to the answer that we are looking for. These are the keywords that we're looking for. Here's the perfect answer. This is what you're looking for. And it's been really fascinating to see people go into that open question and have them start giving a response. And then the AI is able to prompt them. That's a great start. Tell me more. And then it pulls out of them the answer that we're looking for. And then the managers then have the opportunity to go in there and see that, wow, this person got it right off. And they were able to move on to the next portion of the training. This person struggled on this. So I'm going to provide extra coaching to that person on this topic. I can do that. I can do that myself from the tool, from inside the LMS. I can say, hey, you're on the right track. This is what we're looking for. Can you tell me more along this line? Or I can also send that feedback right to the manager. What this does is it cuts down the time that a human has to sit in front of the person and wait for that answer. You mentioned before, no one has time for coaching all of these individuals, but you can use AI to speed things along. If Johnny doesn't need to have coaching on that, then let's skip to something that Johnny does need coaching on. If Johnny does need coaching on this, let's flag that and point that out to the managers so that they can handle that. So the use of AI, the use of surveys, these are all amazing tools that I love to have in onboarding so that people can get the training that they actually need when they actually need it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I love your perspective and how you approach your job. I'm hearing more that it's really around awareness and empathy. And I really haven't thought about it that way before, but when you put yourself in the shoes of a new hire who's coming into a new organization, and I'm sure there's a lot of intimidation, questions about whether you're going to be able to measure up, or you're going to be able to consume and the material and execute in your role. And what I've seen so often is so many training programs are just incomplete because they're short. It's 2 weeks, 2 months, and then all of a sudden someone's out there and they're in front of a customer, and they have not become fluent in that process, and they're really kind of growing in that role as it starts. And there's always going to be, it's inevitable, there's part of that, but I think there's a big difference between knowledge and the ability to transfer that knowledge into conversation confidently and successfully. And I think that's where we've often seen a lot of churn, because people get out too soon and they get discouraged and they develop sales reluctance and they quit. and they're not making money. And so that's great when you can empower somebody with empathy and with a mentor. I haven't heard that before about a mentor who can't
Oh yeah.
fire them. That's a wonderful program for new hires on all different levels. So for lots of reasons, it's great. Well, we've been talking for a while. We could probably talk for the rest of the day, but let's, before we wrap up here, anything that I'd love to hear advice you might have for someone who's brand new in an L&D role, or someone who's a seasoned L&D professional who starts with perhaps a new company. If it were a friend of yours or someone who came to you for advice, what would you tell?
Yeah, I think that goes back to how we started off this conversation with curiosity. I will admit, I know nothing about lighting and I work in a lighting company. I change light bulbs and that's about it. But what I do have is that curiosity of tell me about that. Tell me more. What, why is that a problem? Playing that card of ignorance often gets out the instruction that they need. A lot of times people have the information inside their own heads and they just don't realize that they need to say it out loud for their first time to be able to know that, oh, actually, I had that answer all along. And I think that's one thing that is super helpful for my career in being in L&D and sales enablement is I don't have to have all the answers. I just have to have really good questions. I have to be able to
Mhm.
ask a sales partner or a director, tell me more about that. And that gets
Mhm.
them talking about, all right, so here's the actual problem. Here are some solutions. And they end up giving you, here are the things that we could do about it, but I'm not sure which one to go with. And that's where you can come in from an outsider perspective, and not really an outsider perspective, but you can come in and say, yeah, actually, what I would want from an adult learning perspective is this. And then that's where that collaboration happens. It's not an us versus them. It's a, hey, let's get together and think about it. And then we can make the best solution possible, all from being curious about where the problem is coming from. How's it been solved before? What are the most positive outcomes that we can imagine out of this? And then saying, all right, here are the tools that I have in my quiver that can solve this problem. Which one should we go with?
I love it. It's simple, it's right, really to the core of it all. And it really aligns well with what a salesperson should be doing in front of a prospect, is that same
Amazing.
level of curiosity, right? And that's fantastic. Well, Stephen, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you coming on, and we'll have to do it again sometime.
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
All right. Thanks, man. Talk
Thank
soon.
you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.